What happens when a fearless congresswoman steps into a lion's den of smug condescension, only to find the host baring his teeth? The air crackled with tension on the set of Stephen's late-night show, where Jasmine Crockett, a rising star, in politics known for her sharp tongue and unyielding principles, faced a host determined to twist her words into a punchline. The audience, packed into the brightly lit studio, buzzed with anticipation, sensing a storm brewing. Stephen, with his trademark grin, leaned forward in his chair, his eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and malice, ready to pounce. Jasmine sat across from him, her posture rigid, her gaze steady, already sensing the trap he was laying. She'd agreed to this interview to discuss her latest push for economic reform, a plan to protect working-class families from predatory corporate practices, a cause she'd fought for tirelessly in Congress. But Stephen had other plans, ones that would ignite a firestorm neither could walk away from unscathed. The segment began innocently enough, with Stephen tossing soft questions about her background, his voice dripping with false charm. Jasmine answered with precision, her words clear, her passion evident. She spoke of families struggling to pay bills, of communities crushed by unchecked greed. The audience nodded, some clapping, drawn to her sincerity. But Stephen's smile tightened, his fingers tapping impatiently on his desk. He wasn't here for a policy lecture. He wanted a spectacle. Without warning, he pivoted, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Come on, Jasmine, isn't this just populist grandstanding? You're preaching to the choir, but where's the substance?" His tone was sharp, laced with mockery, as if her life's work was a cheap stunt. The audience gasped, the mood shifting. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening, but she kept her voice even. "Substance? It's in the families I meet who can't afford groceries because corporations dodge taxes while jacking up prices. You want substance, Stephen? Try listening. Instead of performing." The jab landed and the crowd murmured, some cheering her boldness. Stephen's grin faltered, but he doubled down, leaning closer, his voice now a sneering drawl. "Oh, I'm listening, but it sounds like you're dodging the real question. Your plan's a pipe dream, isn't it? All heart, no math." He waved a hand dismissively, as if her entire career was a footnote. Jasmine's hands clenched in her lap, her calm facade cracking. She wasn't here to be patronized, not by a man who'd built his empire on clever quips and cozying up to power. "You want math, Stephen? How about the billions in profits companies? Hoard while workers starve? Or do you only crunch numbers when it suits your ratings?" Her words cut through the studio, sharp and unyielding, and the audience erupted in applause. Stephen's face reddened, his charm slipping into something uglier. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not on his own turf. The tension escalated as Stephen leaned back, his eyes cold, calculating. He saw an opportunity to turn the tables, to make her the villain in his carefully curated narrative. "You're awfully defensive, Jasmine. Sounds like you can't handle a little scrutiny. Maybe politics isn't your game if you can't take the heat." His words were a deliberate jab, meant to provoke, to paint her as unhinged. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the line he'd crossed. Jasmine's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Scrutiny? I face it every day from people who actually understand the stakes. You're not scrutinizing, Stephen. You're grandstanding. And it's pathetic." The word hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. The crowd roared, some shocked, others thrilled, as the show hurtled toward a commercial break. Stephen's smile was gone, replaced by a scowl, his control slipping. Jasmine sat tall, unbowed, ready for the next round. The stage was set for a battle that would only grow fiercer, and neither was backing down. The studio lights blazed hotter as the show returned from commercial break, the audience's murmurs swelling into a restless hum. Jasmine Crockett sat like a coiled spring, her eyes locked on Stephen, who was shuffling papers on his desk, a thin attempt to mask his irritation. He'd underestimated her, expecting her to crumble under his barbs, but she'd turned his smugness against him, and the crowd was eating it up. Now, with the cameras rolling again, he aimed to reclaim his throne, his voice dripping with venom, as he launched into his next attack. "Welcome back, folks," he said, his grin forced, his eyes never leaving Jasmine. "We're here with Congresswoman Crockett, who seems to think she's above a little tough love. Let's talk about your record, Jasmine. You've been in Congress, 2 years? And already you're pushing these pie-in-the-sky reforms. Isn't that a bit ambitious for a rookie?" The word rookie landed like a slap, his tone, implying she was out of her depth, a child playing at power. Jasmine's lips twitched, not in a smile, but in a flash of defiance. She leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with fire. "Ambitious? You mean daring to fight for people who don't have your platform or your paycheck? Call it what you want, Stephen, but I'm not here to play it safe while families lose their homes." The audience erupted, clapping and shouting, their energy feeding her resolve. Stephen's jaw clenched, his fingers gripping his pen so tightly it nearly snapped. He wasn't used to losing the room, and her refusal to bend was unraveling his carefully crafted persona. He shot back, his voice rising, sharp and cutting. "You're good at speeches, I'll give you that. But let's be real, your reforms are a fantasy. You can't just wave a wand and fix the economy. Maybe stick to something you can actually handle." His words were a low blow, dismissing her as incapable, and the crowd's cheers faltered, a few hissing at his audacity. Jasmine didn't flinch. She tilted her head, her eyes boring into him, her voice now a quiet, lethal blade. "Handle? I handle more in a day than you do in a year, sitting there cracking jokes for clout. You want to talk reality? Try facing constituents who've lost everything because people like you prop up the status quo." The accusation hung heavy, and the audience gasped, the air thick with tension. Stephen's face twisted, his charm replaced by raw anger. He leaned across the desk, his voice a snarl. "Prop up the status quo? I call it like I see it, and what I see is a politician dodging accountability. You're out here making promises you can't keep, and I'm the bad guy for pointing it out?" His words were meant to wound, to paint her as a fraud, but they only fueled her fire. The exchange grew fiercer, each word a spark threatening to ignite the stage. Jasmine shot back, her voice rising with controlled fury. "Accountability? You wouldn't know it if it bit you. You sit here, night after night, tearing down people who actually fight for change, all to keep your audience clapping like trained seals." The crowd roared, some standing, their cheers drowning out Stephen's attempt to interrupt. He slammed his hand on the desk, his composure shattered. "You don't get to come on my show and lecture me. You're a guest here, act like it." His shout echoed, a desperate bid to regain control, but it only made him look smaller. Jasmine leaned back, her gaze unwavering, her voice now calm but cutting. "Your show? This isn't about you, Stephen. It's about the people you're too busy mocking to understand." The audience exploded, their applause shaking the studio as Stephen's face burned with rage. The segment ended abruptly, the producer signaling another break, but the war was far from over and Jasmine was ready to fight to the end. Back from the break, the studio pulsed with an electric charge, the audience on edge, their whispers a low rumble. Stephen slouched in his chair, his tie slightly askew, his earlier swagger replaced by a brittle edge. He'd been blindsided by Jasmine Crockett's unrelenting fire, and the sting of her words still lingered. Across from him, Jasmine sat composed, her hands folded, her eyes sharp as daggers, ready to parry whatever he threw next. The crowd sensed the stakes, their anticipation, a living thing, as the cameras zoomed in on Stephen's forced smirk. He cleared his throat, his voice now a jagged mix of sarcasm and spite. "Well, Jasmine, you've got the crowd all riled up, don't you? But let's cut through the noise. Your economic plan, it's all noble talk, but isn't it just a rehash of old ideas that never worked? Why should anyone trust you to deliver? The question was a trap, framed to undermine her credibility, to paint her as a dreamer with nothing new to offer. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver, her voice slicing through his condescension like a blade through cloth. Old ideas? You mean fighting for workers instead of corporations? If that's old, it's because people like you keep ignoring the problem. Trust comes from action, Stephen, not from sitting behind a desk, sneering at those who try. The audience erupted, their cheers a wave crashing over Stephen's fragile ego. His eyes flashed with fury, his fingers drumming a furious rhythm on the desk. He leaned forward, his voice low, venomous. You're real good at playing the hero, Jasmine, but heroes don't last long when they're all talk. Your plan's a house of cards, and you know it. Why don't you admit it's just a stunt to climb the political ladder? The accusation was vicious, meant to cut deep, to frame her as a self-serving opportunist. The crowd hushed, the air thick with tension, as Jasmine's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. A stunt? I've spent my life fighting for people who don't have a voice, while you've spent yours chasing laughs and cozying up to power. You want to talk ladders? Look at yourself, Stephen, clawing for relevance by tearing others down. Her words were a precision. Strike! And the audience roared, some standing, their applause a thunderclap. Stephen's face twisted, his control slipping further as he snapped, You don't know a damn thing about me. I've earned this seat, and I don't need a lecture from some upstart who thinks she's the second coming. His outburst was raw, unscripted, and the crowd gasped, shocked by his venom. The producer's hand hovered over the controls, ready to cut to commercial, but the moment was too raw, too real. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady but searing, each word a hammer blow. Earned it? By mocking people who fight for what's right? You're not a journalist, Stephen. You're a performer, and a cheap one at that. The only thing you've earned is a reputation for kicking people when they're down. The audience exploded, their cheers shaking the studio walls, as Stephen's face burned crimson, his hands shaking. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came, his usual quick wit buried under the weight of her truth. The segment lurched to a close, the producer frantically signaling the end, but the battle had left its mark. Jasmine sat tall, unyielding, while Stephen slumped, his arrogance cracked. The audience was on its feet, their energy a tidal wave, as the show stumbled into another break. The fight wasn't over, but Jasmine had drawn blood, and Stephen was reeling, desperate to salvage his pride in the final rounds. The studio buzzed with restless energy as the show lurched back from its break, the audience's fervor barely contained. Stephen sat hunched, his fingers gripping the desk's edge, his eyes darting between Jasmine Crockett and the crowd, who were still buzzing from her last verbal blow. His polished facade was in tatters, his usual charm replaced by a raw, desperate need to reclaim dominance. Jasmine, unyielding, sat with her chin high, her gaze piercing, ready to meet his next move head-on. The cameras caught every flicker of tension, the air heavy with the promise of another clash. Stephen forced a laugh, brittle and hollow, as he launched his next salvo. "All right, Jasmine, you've got the crowd eating out of your hand," he said, his voice thick with mockery. "But let's talk about leadership. You're out there preaching change, but can you really lead? Or are you just riding a wave of anger to nowhere?" The question was a calculated jab, meant to paint her as a firebrand without substance, a leader too volatile to trust. Jasmine's eyes flashed, her voice cutting through his sneer like a whip. Leadership? It's not about sitting in a cushy chair, tossing cheap shots at people who fight for change. It's about showing up for those who've been ignored, something you wouldn't understand, Stephen, because you're too busy pandering to power. The audience roared, their cheers a deafening tide, some stomping their feet in approval. Stephen's face contorted, his patience gone, his voice rising to a near shout. Pandering? I call it honesty. You're the one selling dreams you can't deliver, stirring up trouble to make a name for yourself. You're not a leader, you're a loudmouth. The insult was crude, meant to degrade, and the crowd gasped, a few booing his venom. Jasmine's hands tightened in her lap, but her voice stayed razor-sharp, each word a deliberate strike. A loudmouth? Better that than a coward who hides behind jokes to avoid the truth. You're not honest, Stephen. You're spineless, the bub. Studio shook with the audience's reaction, their shouts and applause a wall of sound that drowned Stephen's attempt to interrupt. His eyes blazed, his composure shattered as he leaned across the desk, his voice a snarl. Spineless? You. Come on my stage, my show, and throw insults. You're out of your league and you're too arrogant to see it. His words were a desperate lunge, but they only fueled Jasmine's fire. She stood, her movement sudden, commanding the room's attention as she pointed a finger at him. Your stage? This isn't about you, Stephen. It's about the people you dismiss, the ones you mock while they fight to survive. You're not a host, you're a bully, and I'm done letting you hide behind that desk. The crowd exploded, some leaping to their feet, their cheers a tidal wave that seemed to shake the studio's foundations. Stephen froze, his mouth open, caught off guard by her defiance and the audience's unwavering support. The producer signaled frantically, trying to steer the show back on track, but the moment was beyond control. Stephen, his face flushed with rage, tried one last jab, his voice trembling with spite. You think you're untouchable? You'll crash and burn, and I'll be here when you do. Jasmine didn't flinch, her voice low, final, a blade driven. Home. Crash? I'm built for this fight, Stephen. You're the one crumbling, and everyone here sees it. The audience's roar was deafening, their energy carrying her words as the segment staggered to a close. Stephen slumped back, defeated, his eyes avoiding hers, while Jasmine stood tall, the crowd's adoration washing over her. The battle had reached its peak, and as the show barreled toward its end, one thing was clear. Jasmine was unstoppable, and Stephen's reign was faltering. The studio vibrated with raw energy as the final segment began, the audience's roars still echoing from Jasmine Crockett's last stand. Stephen sat rigid, his hands clenched, his eyes darting to the crowd, who were now openly cheering for Jasmine. His empire of wit and control was crumbling, and the weight of it showed in his tightened jaw, his forced smirk barely masking his fury. Jasmine, standing tall, her presence commanding, settled back into her chair, her gaze unwavering. A warrior who'd already claimed the battlefield. The cameras rolled, capturing the electric tension, as Stephen tried to claw back his authority. His voice, strained but sharp, cut through the noise. Well, Jasmine, you've certainly made a splash, he said, his tone laced with bitter sarcasm. But let's wrap this up. You talk a big game about fighting for people, but isn't this just you chasing headlines, stirring up drama for votes? The jab was his last desperate swing, aiming to reduce her to a publicity-hungry politician. Jasmine's smile was cold, her voice steady, each word a final nail in his crumbling facade. Headlines? I don't need them, Stephen. I'm fighting for people who don't have your spotlight, while you're here chasing applause by tearing them down. That's not drama. That's your legacy. And it's weak. The audience erupted, their cheers a thunderous wave, some chanting her name, their voices shaking the studio. Stephen's face paled, his hands trembling as he gripped his desk, his voice rising in a last-ditch snarl. My legacy? You're a nobody who got lucky with a loud mouth. You think you can walk in here and take me down? I'm untouchable. His shout was raw, unhinged, a man unraveling before the world. The crowd booed, their loyalty firmly with Jasmine, who sat unshaken, her eyes burning with resolve. She leaned forward, her voice calm but devastating, each word a deliberate strike. Untouchable? You're a man hiding behind a desk, throwing stones at people braver than you'll ever be. I came here to talk about real problems, real people, and all you've done is prove you're part of the problem. The audience surged to their feet, their applause a deafening roar, as Stephen's eyes widened, his bravado collapsing. He opened his mouth, but no words came, his usual quick wit buried under the weight of her truth. Jasmine pressed on, her voice rising with unshakable conviction. I'm not here for your games, Stephen. I'm here for the families who can't eat, the workers who can't rest, the communities you'll never understand. You can mock me, but you can't stop me. The crowd's cheers reached a fever pitch, a tidal wave of support that drowned out any chance of Stephen's recovery. The producer, frantic, signaled the end, but Jasmine's victory was already sealed. Stephen slumped in his chair, his face a mask of defeat, his empire exposed as hollow. Jasmine stood, turning to the audience, her voice clear and triumphant. This isn't about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. We keep fighting, no matter who tries to silence us. The crowd roared, some wiping tears, others clapping until their hands ached, as the show staggered to its close. Stephen sat silent, his head bowed, a man diminished. Jasmine walked off the stage, her head high, the audience's cheers following her, a beacon of strength unbroken. The battle was over, and she'd won. Not just the argument, but the hearts of those watching, proving that truth and courage could outshine even the brightest spotlight. The studio lights dimmed, but her fire burned on, a triumph that would echo far beyond the night.